The scripture reading this evening comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her maid. And she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children."
So we continue our series tonight of walking through the Bible. As I was looking at Exodus, I made a decision that there's just no way that we would cover the whole of the Exodus in a single Sunday night, so I'm sure that you're happy about that. But we're going to just take the first part tonight. We're going to work our way through the whole Exodus over a few weeks. But tonight we're going to just go through the point of the 10 plagues there in Egypt. Well, in chapter 1, we see, as we look back into Genesis, that Jacob came to Egypt with 70 family members. And they multiplied greatly over less than 200 years there at the beginning of the book of Exodus. By the time they are delivered, 215 years from the time that Jacob came from the land of Canaan down into Egypt at Joseph's behest. They were there about 215 years. But, in that time they grow in number to some 2 to 3 million people, probably most estimates tend to say. At that time, a king came that did not remember Joseph. King came that did not remember what Joseph had done for the nation of Egypt, that he had, through his preparations for the famine that came upon the known world at that time, he had made Egypt the most wealthy nation in the world. He had made Egypt the first nation that we have record of to own all of its own land of its nation. And so, Joseph had done a great deal to secure the greatness of Egypt, and yet this king comes along that does not remember what he did, does not honor what he did. And all he does is look at the descendants that came from Joseph's family, and he sees that they now outnumber the Egyptians. And they continue to reproduce at a great rate. I would even say that they are reproducing at a divine rate at this particular point. And so, in order to mitigate that threat, he enslaves the Israelite people. And they are forced to build cities. They build the supply cities of Pithom and Ramses. And even in the midst of that extreme hardship, which was designed to kind of cull their numbers down, even amidst that, the Israelites continued to rapidly multiply in the nation of Egypt. So this led them to the next problem, or to the next solution, right? To deal with the population growth of the Israelites, and that is the killing of the male babies while keeping the females. Because you can integrate the females into your society and water down the heritage through that. But they tried at first to do it secretly. They got the Egyptian handmaidens, right? And they were to, if it was a male child, they were to kill it. Now, can you imagine a woman who is delivering babies, a handmaiden such as those women were, and then telling them to kill the babies if they are males, and they don't do it. They choose not to do it, and they are rewarded by God for the choice that they made. And they even tell Pharaoh, they kind of lie, they lie to Pharaoh, and they tell him that these Hebrew women are hardy women, right? And they're having the children before we even get there, so we're not able to carry out your command. Well, with that not working, the Egyptians become a little more overt in their efforts. And the command comes down from Pharaoh that they are to take the male Hebrew children and they are to throw them into the alligator-infested Nile River. Well, to them, doing that is like sacrificing to one of their main gods, giving sacrifices of these Hebrew children. But it also is a plan predominantly at just population control. In Exodus chapter 2, we see Moses is born. He is born to a woman named Jochebed. Jochebed is a daughter of Levi. We're not just talking about, when we talk about, as you go forward with Elizabeth and Zacharias, and they are sons and daughters, both of them, of Levi. They're of the tribe of Levi. No, when we talk about Jochebed being a daughter of Levi, we are talking about Jochebed being a daughter of the man Levi. She is a granddaughter to Jacob, to Israel. This is a woman that is very close to, these primary characters that we see, or that we saw last week at the end of the book of Genesis. And she married a grandson of Levi. His name was Amram. And between the two of them, they had Miriam. 3 years before Moses was born, they had Aaron. And now, with this command obviously coming down now at the time of Moses' birth, they have him, and they hid him for 3 months. I always find it interesting that she looked at the baby and saw it was beautiful and decided to hide it. It doesn't matter how ugly a baby is, right? Every mama looks at that baby and says, that's the most beautiful thing in the world. So I think that's kind of superfluous that the Bible threw that in there for us. But she decided to hide Moses and hid him as long as she can. Can you imagine trying to hide a crying baby? Trying to keep that a secret from people around you, keep that a secret from people that are actively seeking to find such babies. It came to a point, obviously, that she was unable to continue that as she saw it. And she puts him in an ark that she made, and she places him in the reeds there of the river and leaves Miriam to watch. I see a little bit of a plan here by Jochebed, right? She's sharp. And she's obviously placed it in the reeds where somebody might walk by that's important. And we know the story that Pharaoh's daughter comes by and she sends her servant into the reeds to get the basket, and they open it up. And to her, a pagan, it's like a gift from the god of the Nile. A child. And yet, she knows that the child is a Hebrew child, and that's probably because of the circumcision, because he would have been circumcised on the 8th day. And so she knew that he was a Hebrew child, but yet she decided to keep him. I love that Miriam's right there, right? She's on the scene the minute that Pharaoh's daughter has Moses right there with her. She comes up and goes, hey, you want me to go get a nursemaid for that child? I mean, this is a well worked out plan. Now, if it had not worked, there's still a great deal of faith in putting your child out in the river, right? And hoping that something will happen good. But when it happened good, they were ready. And guess who got to be the nursemaid to Moses? His mother Jochebed. And so for at least the first 4 years of Moses' life, Jochebed has him at home with her as she is providing is working as the nurse for the child. So she gets to be with her son. He was probably with her until he was about 4 years old, and he was weaned, and the Bible tells us that he returned to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became known. He took that position as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. She names him Moses because he was drawn out. I think we forget that Pharaoh's daughter named him for what she had done there at the Nile that day. Josephus tells us, the Bible doesn't really tell us much about Moses' life from that point till 40 years later. We don't really have a lot, but we can look at Josephus and his Jewish history, and he tells us about the 40 years of Moses' life during this time. And he tells us that he was a general, and apparently a good general in the Egyptian army. And at one point he conquered the nation of Ethiopia there to the south of Egypt. You know, when you think about that, it fits, doesn't it? It's perfect for a general who understands the logistics of moving large numbers of people from here to there, that would be this kind of a skill set that Moses would have as he prepares to move a large mass of people from Egypt to the land of Canaan over the course of 40 years. Somewhere, and we go to Hebrews chapter 11. I know we're in Exodus, but we go to Hebrews chapter 11, and we come to understand that at some point in all this, Moses makes a decision. At the point in which he's 40 years old, he makes a decision that he no longer is going to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he makes the decision that he is going to suffer with his people. He knows he's a Hebrew. And he's going to go and be with his people instead of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And maybe that's right where Exodus picks up with the story where he goes out and he sees a Hebrew being beaten by an Egyptian, right? And in the process of stopping that beating, he kills that Egyptian. And he does away with the body. And you would think that that would win Moses something with the people, right? That he stood up, that he stopped a beating, that people would respect him, that people would want him to help them in other ways. But that is not to be the case. Shortly thereafter, he sees two Israelites fighting. And he tries to make peace between the two men. And they say, "Who made you ruler over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian?" And suddenly he knows that the word is out, right? And Pharaoh also hears about that. But I want us to stop right there and think about what just happened. And I want us to see that these people that Moses, this is 40 years before he leads them out, but these people are still the same way that they're going to be when he's leading them. And that is, they are a people that do not know how to be thankful for what people do for them. They will not be a people that understands how to be thankful to God for what He does for them. And in this particular case, we see that they weren't thankful to Moses either. Well, Pharaoh seeks to kill Moses, and he flees. He flees to the land of Midian. And for us today, that would be modern-day Saudi Arabia, on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. And he marries the daughter of a priest there named Zipporah. And they had a son named Gershom. And that name meant stranger. Because he was a man in a foreign land. He was a stranger to those people. And Moses lives there in Midian for 40 years. And the Bible then tells us that God hears the cries of His people there in Egypt, right? Moses in Exodus chapters 3 and 4, he is a shepherd for his father-in-law Jethro. And he is pasturing the flock, Jethro's flock, on Mount Sinai, when he sees a blazing fire in the midst of a bush. God calls to Moses and he replies, "Here I am." God tells him to not approach and to take off his sandals, for he's standing on holy ground. And he's not to approach lest he die. Moses does what he is commanded. And God tells him, "I am the God of your fathers. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob." And he has a job for Moses to do. He has heard the cry of his people in Egypt, he tells Moses. He says that he is sending him to bring his people out of Egypt. And when Moses hears that, the excuses begin, don't they? I don't know that Moses was an insecure person. I don't think that he was a person that wasn't strong. I just think this was a job he didn't want. And for obvious reasons. He begins with, "Who am I? Who am I to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let your people go?" And God says, "I will be with you." In other words, God's saying, well, really, you're no one. It's not going to be you that delivers them. I'll be with you. I'll be backing you up. And He says, I'm going to give you a sign that when you do deliver them, God just basically talking as if it's already happened, when you do deliver them, you're going to return to this mountain and you're going to worship. You're going to come back to this location after you have delivered the people. Well, Moses decides he's got another question. Who do I say sent me? When they ask me, well, who's sending you? Who are you to come out here? Who do I say has sent me? And God says, I am who I am. You tell them, I am has sent you. And that I am there is the tetragrammaton, that YHWH, the Yahweh word. They'll know that. Jesus is going to use that same eternal present in John chapter 8, is He not? When He said, before Abraham was I am. And it is always in reference to the divinity of God. Moses then says, what if they will not believe me or listen to me? And that's every preacher's question. Every teacher's question is, what if they don't listen? I'm going to tell you all about some of my dreams, okay? This is preacher dreams. I have dreams every so often that I'm preaching and nobody's listening. Y'all are out there just doing whatever you want to do. It's not usually this building. You know how those dreams work. But y'all are just doing what you want to do. Nobody's paying attention. Everybody's talking. People are getting up, doing things. And I can't get people's attention. And that's driving me nuts. It's a bad dream. Kind of what Moses is talking about here. What if I get there and nobody will listen to me, right? I get up and I start talking to them and they start just doing whatever they want to do. What am I going to do then? So God gave him signs. I'll give you something to get their attention, right? You got a staff? Throw it down on the ground. Throws it down on the ground, it becomes a snake, right? Now here's the brave part. You got to reach down and grab it by the tail, right? And when he grabs it by the tail, it becomes a staff again. Then he tells him, he goes, also, you put your hand in your cloak. And when he brings it out, it's white as snow with leprosy. He says, now put it back in. And when he pulls it out, it's clean. So God continues to give him these signs to show them. And as last of all, he says they won't pay attention to those. So maybe God already knows how these people are, right? Jesus called them an evil generation because they always wanted a sign. They always wanted a miracle, didn't they? But yet, no miracle was ever good enough. That he could pour water from anything and it would turn to blood on the ground. Kind of a precursor to what's going to happen with the Nile. Well, Moses pulls out what I think he thinks is his trump card. He says, I'm not a very good speaker. I'm not eloquent. I am slow of speech. Don't believe that either, because as I look at the whole life of Moses, man's talking all the time. He's speaking all the time. He's a powerful speaker. In fact, Aaron's supposed to be his mouthpiece, and yet Aaron rarely talks, and Moses always talks. I think this is really the biggest excuse of them all. The others make sense. This one, I think he's just coming up with stuff now. And God doesn't really take kindly to this one. God answers the others. He considers what Moses is asking on the others, and he gives reasoned answers. But here God seems to get a little bit angry with Moses. And he says, who made your mouth? I made it. Don't tell me what your mouth can't do. I made it. I know exactly what it can do. And then God gives him that concession, right? Well, fine. Your brother Aaron will be your prophet. Someone who speaks for you. That's what a prophet does. He'll be your mouthpiece. He'll be your prophet to speak. In chapters 5 through 7, Moses and Aaron go to their first meeting with Pharaoh. And they tell Pharaoh what God has told them to tell him. Let my people go. And it doesn't go well, does it? Pharaoh asks them a question. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? Folks, that question right there, that's the basis of the hard heart of Pharaoh right there. That's the basis of people's hard hearts to this very day. Who is the Lord to tell me what to do? That's what causes more people to not obey the gospel than anything else. I don't want to be told what to do, and I don't think God should. And it's also the question that God is going to answer 10 times in the plagues, right? Who is the Lord that you should listen to Him? I'll show you who I am by what I do. And by the end of it all, you're going to wish you had listened. My mama said that to me a few times. Did y'all ever have your mother say that? You're going to wish you'd listened to me. Most of the time when she said that, I did at some point down the line. Well, Pharaoh says that. And then he puts harder work on the Israelites. He decides to punish the Israelites for what Moses and Aaron has done. And they turn on Moses immediately. Chapter 6 and verse 12, it says, "But Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, Behold, the sons of Israel have not listened to me. How then will Pharaoh listen to me? For I am unskilled in speech." He jumps back to his, I can't speak very good, right? That's why the Israelites aren't listening to me. That's why Pharaoh's not listening to me. You chose the wrong guy. But that wasn't why they weren't listening. The Israelites weren't listening because they didn't want to work harder. They didn't want more put on them. And they felt like Moses and Aaron were just troublemakers, and they were the ones paying the price. Pharaoh doesn't because he thinks he's a god. Nobody tells him what to do. So it's not Moses' speech, but that's the excuse he goes to. And then God tells him after that. He says, I will make you. He's talking to Moses. I will make you a god to Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. When you get done, when I get done what I'm going to do through you, you're going to look like a god with the power that's going to be exhibited. And he's setting up for the plagues. Before the plagues start, they meet with Pharaoh again, and Aaron's rod is thrown down on the floor, and it too turns into a serpent, right? And out runs the little magicians for Pharaoh, and they've got some kind of trick. It says they're dark arts. They're dark arts of deception. There's no reason for us to believe at all that they had any magical powers or even any power whatsoever. However they did. I saw one show that said they threw their staffs behind these pots and somebody kicked over a pot of snakes and they ran out. That's some kind of way they fooled them. I don't know if that's what they did, but they were using their arts of deception. And they made their snakes come out. But Aaron's serpent ate them all, swallowed them up, and returned to him. So they immediately see this sign from God and they ignore it as they have before. These men are going to attempt, these magicians are going to attempt over and over and over to match what Moses and Aaron are doing. And in chapter 7 through 12 we have the plagues. And they're not just things that God pulled out of a hat to try to do to the nation of Egypt. Every single one of them are an attack on the religious and the economic system of the nation of Egypt. By the time God is done, He is going to leave Egypt completely broken as a nation, and He's going to leave them completely broken religiously as well. Each plague attacks a different Egyptian pagan god. Exodus chapter 12 verse 12 says, "The Lord will bring judgment on their gods." And He did. The first plague is, of course, the water to blood. I always thought as a kid it was just the Nile River turned to blood, but you need to read that text a little closer. It's far more than just the river, the Nile River. It says that the reservoirs, the cisterns, in other words, that were full of water, the pools, the streams, all vessels, wooden and stone, that had water in them, everything that had water in them for the Egyptians became blood. And it killed the fish there in those streams and in the Nile River. And somehow the magicians were able to come in and do something and make Pharaoh believe that they had replicated what Moses and Aaron did with turning the water to blood. See, when you go after the Nile, you go after the Egyptian god of life. Because the whole reason the nation of Egypt exists and can exist in the middle of a desert is the Nile River. You ever seen a satellite photo of the Nile River? It sits in a sea of brown, and it's a green strip that goes right down the middle. Everything around it's green, and everything very far from it is brown as you go into the desert. It's the only way life exists is because there's a river running through it. It's a river of life. And God attacks that with the very first one. Also may have a little bit to do with all those Hebrew children that were thrown in the Nile and their blood that was shed there by the Egyptians. Then we see frogs. My mother, bless her heart, more than once washed a frog in my pocket. I like to carry them around when I was a kid. And I never did find them annoying, but I probably never dealt with them in these kind of numbers either. You know, frogs were everywhere in the land. And this was an attack on the goddess Hek. And she was considered gracious, but now she had become a nuisance. And Pharaoh says at this point that they can go, and the frogs die in large piles, and they cause an incredible stink all over the land. But of course, as Pharaoh is going to do over and over, right? He says, oh yeah, you can go, and then he goes, no, you can't. He rescinds it. And the next thing we see is that Aaron is told to go out and he is to strike the dust to the ground, and the dust becomes lice that infest the people. And see, this brought all Egyptian religion to a complete halt. Egyptians shaved their bodies so that they would be free of lice, so that they could then be ceremonially clean to worship. And now everybody's covered in them. No one's ceremonially clean. And you know, it is at this point that the magicians finally realize we can't keep up with this, right? It's at this point that the magicians of Pharaoh say this isn't something we can do. In fact, they finally admit it. They just say this is the finger of God. There's nothing we can do here. We can't. This is beyond us. Big admission for them. And then we see that insects swarm across the land after God's warnings to Pharaoh continue to be ignored. And Pharaoh once again says that they can go worship. And the insects are gone. And when they are gone, he says, no, you can't. God warns Pharaoh again. You know, God keeps warning Pharaoh. It isn't like he just throws these things on him. He gives him a chance. Pharaoh's getting chance after chance after chance to make the right choices. And time after time again, he makes the wrong one. And the people suffer for it. And God is ignored, and all the Egyptian livestock die. Well, this is quite a blow to the economy of the nation, to their religion. In Egypt, cows were sacred. Where do you think the idea for a golden calf came from? People that lived their entire lives in a nation that held cattle as sacred. That kind of baggage sticks. But they have found over there in their excavations, they have found elaborate tombs filled with all kinds of wealth for bulls that have died. Bulls that were sacred. And they held them in high honor. And they all died. God crippled their religion that day. Moses then cast ashes from an oven into the air. And every living thing those ashes contacted were covered with terrible sores. Both cattle and man. And this goes to the god Typhon there in Egypt, where a man would take on the name Typhos, and then he would go and he would be burned alive, and they would take the ashes of that man, the Egyptians would, they would toss them into the air, just like Moses did with the ashes from the oven, and whoever those ashes touched, they would be protected from the wrath of any other gods. Well, God just showed that doesn't work. Because those ashes Moses threw up did not bring protection, it brought pestilence upon the people. Terrible sores that covered them all over. You know, Pharaoh's magicians were so afflicted with these sores that they were not even able to come into the courtroom and stand before Pharaoh at this time. You know, the Egyptians were then tested to see if they believed in their gods or God. You know, God made it clear in the plagues that He was going to show them that He was Lord, that He was God. And that's what He's doing. Now He's going to give them a chance to show whether they believe it or not. The warning is given to the people that hail is going to come upon the land. I remember I did a test with my teenagers when I was in Denver, and I had them on the test. It had listed the 10 plagues, and we had to make the discussion about that it wasn't hail, it was hail, right? Because like half of the test had HELL instead of HAIL, and so I think either they just were mistaken all that time, but it was hail, and they were warned about that. And they were given the opportunity to bring their animals in. Now you see, there's the test. If you're an Egyptian, do you believe this Moses guy in his God? Or do you trust your Egyptian gods and you'll just do what you want? This is God's test of them. To see if they're beginning to move over and understand who is really in charge in this particular situation. Well, hail and lightning strike Egypt everywhere except Goshen, where the Israelites lived. People, animals, and plants were destroyed, and most all of the plant life was beaten down except for the wheat. But that was only left for the next thing to come, right? Because then the locust came upon the land and stripped it bare. It says that you could not see the land. You could not see ground for the locusts that were up on it. And in chapter 10 and verse 7, it says, Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the men go that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is destroyed? There's the assessment of what's going on. There's the assessment of what God has now done and how they perceive it. This nation has been completely destroyed. So He told them to go, but just as surely as He did the other times, He rescinded the order again. Then we see darkness. And darkness is, you might think, well, that's not really that bad a thing, right? Well, it's darkness that you can't see anything. We don't really deal in that unless we have major power outages and things of that nature. We don't deal with that. We have so much light pollution that darkness is not really all that dark here. Been in Africa where there was no lights anywhere, and it was dark. And here is a darkness that was, one of those that I guess you'd say you can almost feel. But darkness was an attack against the chief Egyptian god, and that is the god Amun-Ra, the god of the sun. God took that away from them. Moses then warns, there will be one more plague. And it will be the death of the firstborn. And on that day, God begins the Jewish calendar. He says, today is your first day. We're going to begin the month of Nisan. And He says, on the 14th day of that month, I will pass over. And I will take the firstborn. For the Jews, the Passover becomes a feast, but at that time they were to take a lamb. They were to take a lamb without blemish. It was to be sacrificed at twilight there on that day before that evening came. The blood was to be placed on the doorposts. They were to eat standing up, right? Ready to go. Sandals on their feet, fully clothed, staff in their hand, and eating, ready to go when God said it's time to go. They were to roast that lamb. They were to eat it along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They were not, we need to understand that the Israelites in this particular case, on this particular night, while many of the other plagues didn't affect them at all on this particular night, if they wanted to be delivered from the plague, they had to have some action in their life. There were things they had to do. There was things they had to obey if they did not want this plague to come upon them. And when we think about this, I want us to remember that the death of the firstborn, it's not just the people, it's not just children, it's also cattle. It's every firstborn. You could literally have an entire family wiped out if the daughter is the firstborn, who's the wife, if the husband's the firstborn, and they're one child. You can wipe an entire family out just like that. This final plague was devastating to the Egyptians and to their people. But it wasn't just children. I always thought when I was young it was just children. But it wasn't. Well, they are told to leave. Pharaoh's had enough. He's had death in his own household now. And he tells them to leave, and they are given the valuables by the Egyptians to take with them. That was foretold all the way back at the burning bush, that they'll beg you to leave, and they'll give you stuff to take with you if you'll just leave, right? Here, take all this, just get out. We've had enough of this. Chapter 12 and verse 33 says, the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we will all be dead. And they began their journey that day, that night. Remember, they're standing ready. They're eating ready. And when the word came down, right? Staff in hand, shoes on feet, full belly from the Paschal meal, and we're heading out. And they begin that great journey. Next week we'll look at them at the Red Sea, and we'll move over to Sinai and see the events that happened there. This journey with these Israelites is hard to just skim over. There's a lot there. A lot of God trying to not only, He's shown the Egyptians that He's Lord. He's going to spend 41 years trying to show these Israelites that He is. They're going to fight Him tooth and nail. But the Exodus is an incredible story. And at this particular point, as we reach this Passover time, it's a story of deliverance, and we have that today. That through the death of the Lamb provided by God that takes away the sins of the world, God delivers us. Just as those lambs that were slaughtered at the twilight there in Egypt, and their blood was placed on those houses, the blood of Jesus Christ is placed on this earthly tabernacle, that I might be saved. And that you might be saved. And if you have need of that this evening, we hope and pray that you will let us help you. Why don't you come as we stand, as we sing.